Good evening, John. When I was in Bible school, I remember them telling us that the Bible was going to be our number one textbook throughout the entire course of the 5 years that I went to Bible school. It was the number one textbook. Now, it wasn't really textbook, but it was used in every single class, including algebra, which was odd. But we did, and it's not just a textbook. Of course, we knew that too. It's our life. It's our breath. It's our existence. It's the message of God to His people. Anything that we have questions on can be addressed by just following His Word and listening to it and reading it and studying it. And I need to start adjusting my schedule because I have so much going on between home taking care of the kids, between school and studies, online classes, everything that I'm trying to accomplish just in the next couple of years is going to be crazy. But if I don't have a rock to stand on, I'm going to fall. And I have to keep that in mind. His Word is my rock. You have the same rock. We all do. That rock is Christ, and this is His Word. And it's what we need to stand on when times are stressful, when times are difficult. I'm doing a paper right now in biology on how important it is to exercise for our mental health, for our overall attitude, for how we feel about life, and physical activity, and how that induces our overall benefit to our physical well-being. I think the Bible is the same way as physical exercise. Studying the Bible has on our spiritual life, and that in our growth as a spiritual person and getting closer to God. So we are jumping into one of the most exciting passages, one of the most exciting stories, the life of David. But before we get to him, we have to deal with Saul and Samuel. Now, Samuel comes along through a miraculous birth, and there's been a lot of those throughout the Bible. There's, angel of the Lord coming to people, or just the Lord opening up the womb and allowing someone to have a child that couldn't previously. And those are always really amazing stories. Chapter 1, it's about 1100 BC. If you want to go kind of like a timeline, about 1100 BC. But God basically blesses this woman, Hannah, who has a sister who's able to have children. But she's not. And she, of course, is not bitter, but she's just miserable. And she's in misery because she cannot have children. And it's a feeling that you don't really grasp unless you're there, or unless you've had to deal with that. And we know what that can do. And it's grievous, it's consuming. And her husband didn't understand. He's like, well, aren't I better than 10 sons or 7 sons or whatever? He says, you don't understand that kind of thing. But Hannah goes to the temple. They go once a year to do their sacrifices. And not the temple, but the tabernacle. The temple wasn't built yet, but they go there, and the high priest, who was Eli at the time, basically thinks that she's drunk because she's praying, and she's just praying with her whole heart, her emotions, but there's no sounds coming out of her mouth because she's so in depth in prayer, and he thinks she's just drunk, and he's like, drop your wine, woman. But she's like, no, sir, I'm desperate. I'm desperate for a child. And God's high priest says, okay, and we'll pray that you'll be blessed. And she does. And she goes and has Samuel, and she offers Samuel to the Lord. So the next year, she after she's weaned him, she brings Samuel to the high priest, and he ends up working with the priests and helping them and everything. So she is doing that by an act of faith. How does she know that she's going to get any more kids? If you go through a period of time where you're mourning and wishing you could have some, and suddenly you're blessed with one, you're not going to just turn around and hand them over to the ministry or to the church full time. You're going to want to hold on to them. But God gives us blessings so that we can bless others. In this case, she acts in faith, and God does bless Hannah with more children. Chapter 2 is a reminder. It's a prayer of hers and sort of a song too. just reminding us that God is holy, He's the rock, He's just, and He has, almighty power. He can do whatever He wants to do. And we know that because the Bible continues to tell us that through these stories, through these messages that are for us. Real stories about real people that lived during a real time, and archaeology has continued to prove that these were real events, real places, real people, and it will continue to prove these things to us. Eli, of course, was not a very good priest, and his sons weren't any better. So the whole thing was not very good, and this is on the end of the Judges period, so people are still kind of messed up a little bit. And I mean, his sons were dipping into the offering pot, trying to take stuff out. It was crazy. Chapter 2. Samuel is ministering before the Lord when he's about 9 to 11 years old. We see that Hannah does get more children, so she gets a double blessing. The man of God. It's funny because Samuel is there now. Eli knows his sons aren't very good, and he's upset with their son. But it's like he says in chapter 2, verse 25, if one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? I'm thinking that would be what you're supposed to do as high priest, is interceding between the two. But he didn't do that. But Eli, let's see, God basically comes against the house of Eli and against his sons. Promises that he's going to come against them. In chapter 3, we get the call of Samuel, which is just an amazing story. That's kind of how I feel sometimes when I go to bed and I'm not supposed to go to sleep yet, but I'm supposed to pray, or I'm supposed to do something in the Word, or something like that. I'll just hear the voice of God calling, and that's what Samuel hears like 4 times. And he goes to Eli and goes, yes, master, because he thinks that Eli is calling him. And then Eli's like, it wasn't me, go back to bed, you foolish boy. But no, it's just like, he realizes it's God. It's God. And Samuel is called into the ministry of being a prophet for God. Being not a judge so much, but a prophet. And that's kind of where the office of prophet really kind of took form and started with him. Even though it was a different man of God who came to Eli and told him previously that you're going to take care of your household's going to be cursed now. I like verse 19 in chapter 3. Thus Samuel grew and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground empty. None of his words failed. And it doesn't mean that everything Samuel said just wasn't worthless, but it means that all the prophecies that Samuel said came to pass. Anything that God told Samuel came to pass, because the word is sure. The word to his prophets are sure. Chapter 4, we get the whole story of the Ark of the Covenant being captured by the Philistines. Eli, who's blind and about 98 years old, he dies. His sons die because they're just like in terror that the Ark of God could be captured, because they thought it was God himself. They were making all this noise, and there's noise in the camp. The Philistines were like, God must have come to the camp, and they're making all this noise, and noise does not equal righteousness. Your ability to make noise does not make you righteous. Just because you can go in there and be loud doesn't mean that you're doing it the way God wants you to. God speaks in still small voices a lot. He doesn't necessarily want you to go stand on the table and preach to the people like that. Sometimes he wants you just to pay for somebody's meal, or do something simple like that. A kind, generous comment to somebody goes a long way. God has destinies for each one of us. He has a plan for each one of us, and we see that. And the whole thing with the ark getting captured into the Philistine territory, and God just shows that he's the Lord above all gods. The god Dagon, which is like in ancient beliefs, the god Dagon was, I think, the father of Baal, which comes up later. And we see that a lot in the kings and the way the gods that were worshipped in that period. When Israel was falling away to idol worship, it was to these foreign gods, and we see that the ark basically takes care of itself. God takes care of his own ark. I mean, who can stand in the presence of the ark? We see that in chapter 6. The Philistine army was aware that an offering needed to be made, so they went ahead and made an offering, because they were plagued. When the ark came into their territory, they were plagued for years. They didn't really understand that they needed to get rid of this thing altogether, but they did eventually get rid of it. And then it gets, of course, into the Israelites get it back. but it's just, it amuses me how long it went from town to town to town. It's like the Philistines didn't get it, that this was God, not just an Ark of the Covenant, not just a piece of furniture for the tabernacle, but God himself was doing something in that group. The Ark of the Covenant's not God, but it was representing God's presence in the enemy camp, and he was dealing with the enemy. That's my point. That's what I'm getting at. God is not God of form. There's no form to God, but is still a holy thing that we had to understand. And of course, chapter 7, we see the army of Israel gathering at Mizpah. It says, do not cease praying, the Lord will protect us from the Philistines. There's this big thing where God just goes into the battle, confuses the Philistines, and takes care of the whole thing. We're going to end with chapter 7 right here. I know we're kind of just flying through it, but there's just so much, and we want to get through this in a year. We don't have time to go through it verse by verse as much as I'd love to. But we are enjoying the ride, so continue to study, my friend.